All right, so industrialism and the digital age, which is where we are at. I'm sorry about that. Sun is shifting on me. Um, there we go. So again, this is a picture of how we're farming these days. It's much more mechanized. It's automated, less labor intensive. So population, obviously, in terms of children per nuclear family, is dropped because we don't actually need 7 kids to tend the farm. My family had 4 for the pig farm because it's become much more mechanized. And if you can afford a tractor or whatnot, that helps a lot and reduces the need for labor, which is obviously changing kind of the foundational knowledge that we have of agriculture in general. Goods and services are produced through mass employment, and this is really when we get into services ideas. Formal versus informal sectors. Formal. So this gets into formal and informal economies a bit. The formal economy is done through, you have the permits, you have the codes, you're paid, you're paying taxes. The informal economy and the informal sectors tend to be maybe selling fruit on the side of the road, or a fruit stand that's not permitted. Those kinds of things get into the informal sector. So we'll get into that more when we get into the economy piece. Agriculture and basic needs, jobs are less valued and mechanized. So agriculture in general, in terms of status, has now kind of turned into, like, if you're an owner of a farm and it's a big farm, then there's a lot of money involved. And at least in my background, farming was not something that money was associated with, to be honest. We were not wealthy at all. I wouldn't even say that we were in the middle class for a lot of the years that we were growing up. But again, I think that this piece of agricultural jobs kind of not valued in status piece is fascinating. It quickly became, when we moved into agriculture, and even in today's world, it wasn't necessarily about the person who was doing the farming. It was more about the person who owned the farm and owned the property. This is where the real money became kind of evident, and creating social status and having power over and control over. What we do get in today's world is niche jobs, which is like fulfilling a specific kind of subsector of employment, like the computer scientist in the Silicon Valley. Those used to not exist, prior to the 1970s. So again, we're moving into this new frame and this new age, and it's going to bring up a lot of interesting cultural kind of conundrums, like the idea of universal basic income, because of this automation, digital age piece. Once robots, the McDonald's in my hometown has started to, they don't have individuals taking people's orders anymore. It's done through basically like a vending machine, how you pay that way. We're reducing labor very quickly in terms of human labor, and what we're moving towards is automation and robots. And it's kind of predicted by 2030, 60% of jobs are going to be gone due to this automation. And we can see it in the fields and in agriculture as well. So globalization, neoliberalism, this is an interesting tie-in. Neoliberalism is the idea of privatization, less government regulation, less taxes, kind of, and this is spreading around the world, the idea of reducing government regulation and increasing the idea of private property and capitalism. Ultimately, the big question becomes, what does this impact? What is the globalization, neoliberal impact on traditional livelihoods? Like the Tiwi of Australia that now live in permanent settlements. Again, this is when we start to get into real questions about function. If our function is to gain as much wealth as individuals as we can and not care about other people while we're doing it, and control over them as the goal, is that the direction that is going to be most sustainable and produce the most kind of quality of life overall for as many people as possible? These are the big questions that come into this kind of globalized neoliberal culture conundrum around the digital age. In terms of kind of economic structure, so we're moving more into economy now, which is great because the whole modes of livelihood lends itself to this conversation. I put up here sharing is caring because that's really what we're going to talk about is reciprocity and redistribution. So redistribution is a form of exchange in which accumulated wealth is collected from members of a group and recollected or reallocated in a different pattern. Taxes is a form of redistribution. Okay, so if they take money out of your salary to build a road so that you can get to your job, that is a form of redistribution. Redistribution in terms of an anthropological perspective, we tend to talk about the idea of potlatch. And the potlatch is northwestern North America. Okay, so we're talking about Oregon, Northern California, all the way up through kind of Canada and kind of Alaska area. So northwest coast, really the coastal region. And it's an elaborate redistribution system where the chief maintains prestige and status through a feast. So the potlatch is basically gathering all these goods and the food, and they have this ceremony, this whole feast structure, and the chief is supposed to just bombard the community with all of these lavish gifts and all of these other things. It's basically a giving ceremony. It's practiced by the Kwaka Waka of the Pacific Northwest. And some interesting things that happen is you can kind of have a potlatch, and then it can turn into kind of a competition of potlatches. In this structure, there is status. So one house might have kind of a higher status. If you challenge somebody to a potlatch, then it's basically a battle of ceremonies. Who's having the best party? And you may overthrow this one other individual that had higher status, or this other family that had higher status before. So if you want to research the potlatch, I recommend it. I discuss it extensively when we get into native peoples in North America, especially the Northwest Coast. Some fascinating stuff that happens around the potlatch. Franz Boas studies the Kwakiutl in this area. And really what he does is salvage ethnography. He realizes that these people are going to die out from disease, but also cultural destruction. He realizes that assimilation is coming and that these people are losing their traditions and values. So he and some other ethnographers, I believe George Hunt, they start to photograph and take video of these people. So you can see some of the original Boas videos if you look them up in terms of the Kwakiutl dancing and whatnot. Leveling mechanism is again this idea of unwritten, culturally embedded rule that prevents someone becoming more wealthy than another individual. A leveling mechanism could be a form of taxes. Again, in a lot of countries and even in the United States during kind of World War II and post-World War II, what we had was a tax rate of 90% after you made umpteen $1 million. It would go back into kind of the country. So this was a leveling mechanism where you would never have somebody become a billionaire unless they were really good at saving and they saved for a long time. That's our version of leveling mechanism. A lot of cultures basically did not allow certain individuals to have more wealth than they deemed appropriate. Okay. Consumptions of funds. Again, consumption funds, why do we spend money, at least in our kind of society? Basic needs fund, food. Recurrent cost funds, this could be things like electricity and water. Entertainment fund, leisure. Ceremonial fund, this could even be, baseball all the way through religious kind of tithing. Rent and tax fund, obviously this is mortgage and kind of property taxes and moving into that structure of and again, now we get into minimalism, which is okay with kind of not having a bunch of extra, but just tending to their basic needs and having just kind of the minimum. Consumerism, wants are infinite and never satisfied. And this is something that in American culture is kind of typified. We continue to promote that generation after generation, that we should just keep wanting things, and then when I get the raise, I'm going to get them. This changed a little bit for American culture when we went through the Great Depression. My grandparents had a very different view of consumerism than my parents and even my generation. And it's around, obviously, dealing with things like the Great Depression. So can culture change through some of these economic disasters or catastrophes? Yes, of course. Entitlements, a lot of people talk about them in the American context of things like Medicare and Social Security. However, we pay for those. Those are all taxes that come out of our structure. But the idea that someone is entitled to certain things like public education. That would be an entitlement. Uh, Entitlement to basic needs, where entitlement becomes kind of a bad word politically, and really what it is if we feel like we're a community and we need to take care of people, it's our ability to pull together our resources and take care of those individuals. Consumption and food. What you see here is a bunch of plates of bugs. I am a bug eating advocate because I think that it's probably the wave of the future in terms of protein and water usage. The UN has put out reports like it's a fascinating kind of concept. I mean, it has a lot to do with our food taboos. Kuru is basically a mad cow disease of humans, of the 4A people, and what we find out of it is that women eat dead humans, usually relatives, because men eat most of the meat, and it's a male-dominated society. It is deadly. Anthropologists went in there and were kind of baffled by what was happening, and they figured out, oh wow, the women are actually eating the brains of the dead relatives that is actually giving them this kuru, which is kind of mad cow of humans. It's not a good thing at all. And again, we kind of have this discussion because of food taboos, and what I mean is most cultures have taboos around eating relatives and cannibalism. This is like almost a universal. So I bring this one up because it's kind of an anomaly. Our food taboos, obviously, in the Americas are things like eating dog, eating cat, eating horse, and eating bugs. We've culturally deemed these things as not dog, cat, horse as domesticated partners, animals, and bugs below our cultural values, basically. Cultural materialism, again, a lot of this versus symbolic anthropology. A lot of food taboos come out of symbolism. So it could be out of creator traditions or creation stories. A lot of it comes out of a connection to deities or reincarnation. So symbolic anthropology would really get into the idea of reincarnation being the reason why we don't eat other mammals or other animals, period. Cultural materialism is much more into the process of energy. So maybe these food products made us sick back in the day. So then now we've created a taboo around it. Items of exchange, material goods, things like food, artifacts in the archaeological record like stone tools. Tools would be material goods. Symbolic goods. Symbolic goods might be stories or our own life stories, our own personal histories, or the transfer of myths and rituals. Remember, when we are getting into what should we transfer as an anthropologist to culture that we're studying, symbolic goods tends to be the one. Stay away from the unethical, like give somebody a machete for information. Next thing you know, the machete is causing all kinds of problems within their culture you had no intended consequence of that causing. It's better to share stories, which is a symbolic good, and I'll continue to refer to them in this way. Labor is work, money is money, people are people. What else? Services, again, the idea of having trading services, right? Back in the day, again, even kind of closer to our history would be that in the farming community, a lot of times it'd be like, hey, can I borrow your tractor? If you need help or something down the road, I'll be able to lend that to you. So these are the modes of exchange, balanced and unbalanced. Pure gift, no exception or thought of return. This would be like you handing a person experiencing homelessness $20 and not expecting ever to be repaid. Or somebody unnamed donates a bunch of art to a museum. That's a pure gift. Reciprocity requires a repayment or exchange of goods or services. So there's a bunch of different reciprocities. Generalized reciprocity, this is like you hanging out with your friends, you buy your friend a burger, you expect your friend to get you a burger down the road, but it's not really expected. It's just kind of generalized. And this is a lot of times we operate in this way with loved ones. Balanced or expected reciprocity, this is like our normal market kind of reciprocity in a way. And this is that if you give me something, like a bag of rice, then I'm going to pay you for it, and it is time specified. It might be now, it might be on credit, it might be till the end of the month. Negative or unbalanced reciprocity is an attempt to get something for nothing, like haggling, theft, gambling, or exploitation. And then the last one that we talk about is market reciprocity or exchange, the idea that both sides are getting the better deal. So when I go in and buy sale items, I think I'm getting a better deal, and then the company thinks they're getting a better deal.